Imagine yourself under a starry sky, around the warm glow of a sacred fire, where speakers gather to share their wisdom and insights. Creating a sacred space where all are welcome to warm their hands. Here are your hosts, Sarenth Odinson, Snow, Cabra, and Emily Streaking Fate. Discuss spirituality, mythology, animism, and culture around a virtual sacred fire. Won't you join us around Grandfather Fire?
Oh, Dionysus. Io. Caerete, Dionysus. Caerete, Dionysus. Caerete, Dionysus. Hail and welcome to you, leopard-skinned and wild, grape-bound and tame, yeast-laden and drunk, manic and fierce, beautiful one found in theater and in voice, glorious one of mask and desire, bloody one and clean one, bound and free, starry and earth, blessed wanderer, homekeeper, fetter loosener and binder. You of the blessed curls, you of the sweet breath. Io Dionysus, Io Dionysus, Io Dionysus. Beautiful one and blessed one, inspirer and utterer. Hail to you for all your blessings. Hail to you for all the things you have done and will do. Hail for the paths you walk, before, behind, and beside. Hail to the ways yet to walk. Hail to the ways you have opened, and hail to the bounty you give. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Yet another episode of Around Grandfather Fire. This is episode 136 with my good friends and co-hosts Snow and Emily Streaking Fate. How are you all doing tonight?
I am doing pretty well. It has been a busy week on my end. I'm currently going through the Kemetic Epagamental days. So there has been a lot of celebrating and protection stuff and coloring. So doing quite well. How about
I
you,
am
Snow?
good. I have been busy. I have been packing for a trip because I am going to be on your continent from the start of August to the end of September. So I have a 9-hour flight Monday afternoon. Woo! So I have been busy packing and doing that, as well as working on top secret projects that vaguely half got unveiled today. If anyone saw that on my blog, listeners can go look at that at snowthegoth.com. And yeah, and around that, I've just been watching odd bits of the Olympics because that's happening and despairing over the state of the US women's football team.
That bad, huh?
It was painful because I my go-tos have been the judo and the fencing, and the judo and the fencing had finished for the day, like the morning session, and the women's football, the US were playing Japan. So I was like, I'll watch that, I'll cheer on the US, go on. And I was watching, And the three defenders at the back were just passing between each other. And the Japanese team were just kind of stood in the middle of the pitch, being like, I mean, you can do that. You're not going past us, and we're not going to bother trying to get the ball off you and score for ourselves. We'll just stay here. It's comfy. We like this part of the
Oh
pitch. We'll
God.
just run around here as those three women defenders are just passing between each other, and the rest of the US team are like, I mean, I guess we're here too. We're getting paid. Sure. So I was like, this is painful. I'm switching this off. I'm not even waiting till halftime. This is ridiculous. Because the commentators were like, they're just doing this over and over.
Oh my God. That is painful.
It was. And after watching, because the judo's been really good. We've had some really good judo. And my housemates aren't really into judo, but they'd been looking at me and like, ooh, and making other appropriate noises in reaction to various things. It had been good. Lots of people being made angry and getting their heads slammed into mats and things. It's a fun time.
Oh, hell yeah. I used to do judo.
Yeah. Mm.
I didn't realize today was the day for that. Damn.
It's been going since it started.
Mm.
Because I think the first couple of weeks are blocked out for judo, and then after that they start the taekwondo.
Ooh.
So I don't know if they're using the same places in Paris for it or what, but that's just how they've kind of blocked it out. So in a week or two, I will be sitting with my significant other watching taekwondo, and it will be fun for at least me.
Really quick.
Yeah.
Really quick before we go to me. For the listeners who don't know what the hell the epigomenal days are, would you please provide some explanation?
So, the Kemetic New Year is known as Wep Rompet, and it is the rising of Sirius, the dog star. And the 5 days before that are known as the epigomenal days, the time outside of time. Because it is a leap year this year, there are 6. And for me, that started on Monday, and Wep Rompet, the Kemetic New Year, will be on this coming Monday. And so each of those days is the birthday of a child of Gebenut, because there's an extra day. The first day 0 this year is for Jehudi. But then we celebrate the birthday of each of the 5 children of Gebenut. So Osiris, Heruwer, like Horus the Older, Set, Isis, and Nebhat. So today is Aset or Isis's birthday. And as part of Kemetic Orthodoxy, they've had color pictures that you can color in for each of the gods on each of their birthdays. And so I've really been enjoying doing that and putting them on my altar. Although the first one, I made the mistake of giving it to Sarah to hold after it had been on my altar overnight, and his reaction was like, no. Because Sarah gets extra reactive to spiritual stuff, and sometimes the Kemetic gods are just a little not what he needs at the moment. But yeah, so that's been really exciting.
And for those unfamiliar with the Egyptian or Kemetic name, Jehuti is Thoth.
So yeah, I have been really busy because work has decided to crank up the overtime again. I'm probably going to get whacked for overtime despite having worked 2 days in a row. This is probably going to turn into a third after this broadcast. So yay! What have I been working on? So the WordPress has been taking a lot of my brain power lately because Malik is a royal bastard and gives me really good stuff to chew on. So I've been writing a prayer for Freyr in his aspect of the god of the course of the sun during the year. And then I've also been working on the topic that Malik assigned for me at this point, which is negotiating with spirits that you are actually friendly with or on friendly terms with, because they had me write for last month about negotiating with unfriendly spirits and what that looks like. So I've been trying to take this post in a different direction than last time while using that as a springboard. So that's been fun. I've been writing that like in between rounds or on my breaks. So that's been mostly eating my mind. Like, how do I explain this to people? Like, because I'm used to doing the thing. How do I now take the thing I'm so used to doing and explain people in plain language how to do it? So that's been fun. The book that I've been writing has sat in its alpha state for the time being till I get more feedback, just because it took such a huge amount of effort to write the alpha state in the first place that I'm not ready to take on the beta yet. I'm also working on for anybody that is in the area for Ann Arbor Pagan Pride. That is going to be September the 14th of this year, and we were going to need people to do workshops. If you know any vendors in the area that'd be interested, please let them know. We are getting the word out now. By the time this episode drops, which is probably going to be in about a week or two, I imagine, from recording date, this is probably going to drop mid-August, I imagine, or at least the first or second week of August. In any case, we need people. And I'm also working on the esoteric program for the Troth, which is its own fun, massive project because we're doing a mass reorganization and a redevelopment. So I've got my plates are full and spinning. And it's the last of those has been really cool because it's a chance to really bring a new perspective, because just going through some of the older material and some of the stuff that people have been involved in the Troth have talked about, a lot of it has been of an age, shall we say. And it's really nice to be able to update and expand, like greatly expand the breadth and depth of a program that's hopefully going to make a really good impact, not only for the Troth, but for heathenry more broadly. So, yeah, like I said, lots of plates spinning.
So after recent events, you've really got the hang of this resting and not doing too much thing.
I mean,
I'm proud of you.
Thanks. I find that if I don't have stuff to do, it drives me nuts. So I'm not very good at resting, obviously.
It drives you nuts, or you drive Emily nuts?
I mean, yes.
All of the above.
I do it with love. I think that you raise a good point.
I do that occasionally.
I think that for me, the taking too much time off or feeling like I'm not doing enough gets to me, and it makes it so much harder to actually relax when I'm trying to relax. And I'm not sure if that's, my hyperfocus being the issue, or my ADHD, or my who fucking knows, any of my neurodivergencies, and or I just want to be useful.
Cultural indoctrination into the idea of productivity being what we're all aiming towards, and an end result being the measure of success in life.
I mean, there's that too. I mean, just read me for filth. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Much love.
You're the one who's written like half a dozen blog posts about this.
Right. Sure.
And then you wake up and go, oh, I've only got 13 projects to work on today. I just had another.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, though, I am learning how to put things back. I am learning. It's a long process.
On the shelf or in the calendar?
So, a little bit of both. So one of the things that I am doing is this year I am winding down my involvement with Crossing Hedgerows as a board member, because not only are we just going in different directions, but the demands of life in general, it's time. It's time.
Welcome to AGF 136, where we stage an intervention.
But I think that there's also been some within the milieu of all the things that I've mentioned, there is some reallocation. So like, I'm not doing the 500 words a night for the book anymore. I'm letting that rest. That is actually like on the shelf until I get actual feedback. Um, the work with the Ann Arbor Pagan Pride Day is where I have a defined thing that I'm doing, and that's it. Because the unfortunate reality is that I know that I've only got so many spoons, and work is eating a ton of them. And so, yes, I am getting better at resting and saying, no, I can't take on this many projects. That's too many. It has been a hard lesson. I had to get sick and hospitalized, and then I had to get hurt at work for that to happen. But,
I was going to
I
say
do eventually learn.
you ran into the point where you were trying to eat soup, you'd run out of spoons, and we're trying to eat soup with chopsticks
To be fair, there were noodles in it at one point.
at one point, but then you got rid of the noodles, and then you're eating broth with chopsticks, and that's how you wind up in hospital.
You're not wrong. I am a work in progress.
As are we all.
Oh. So, without too much further ado, do we want to introduce our guest? Because as fun as it is to watching Sareth get dragged, I'm sure that's not the only reason that they wanted to come on.
Sure, would you like me to do the honors?
If you would like.
Emily Kamp is an animist, polytheist, and Bacchic-Orphic initiatory specialist within the Starry Crown lineage. She honors the gods through song, drumming, dance, storytelling, and teaching. Sometimes she puts her classics degree to use by translating ancient hymns and poems. She draws inspiration from the many worlds through which she walks, the waters of the San Francisco and Chesapeake Bays, the history of Bacchic liberation and anarchist struggle, and the halls of academia and the labyrinth alike. Emily Kamp, welcome to Around Grandfather Fire.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I just want to let you know, Sarenth, we're here for you. If there is ever any help you need, you
I
can always
appreciate that. And
delegate.
I will let you know if and when I need something. And I appreciate that I have so many people in my community willing to step up like that. I really do.
Welcome to Overworkers Anonymous. It's been 15 days since my last unnecessary project.
For those of you who are on the podcast and don't have access to the visual, the number of times that I pointed to myself while I was muted while Sarenth was talking and did the "me too, buddy, me too" gesture was at least once.
Yeah, yeah. I appreciate the solidarity.
But yes, thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely.
It is a pleasure to be here.
So I guess let's dive right in. So, what is a Bacchic-Orphic? What is that? What is that? That if I'm coming fresh off of this podcast and I've never heard of that before, what is Bacchic-Orphic?
Okay. There are multiple ways to approach the answer to this question. I'm going to go with the historical approach and ground this a little bit in what was done in the ancient Mediterranean. Obviously, Dionysus, who's called Bacchus both in Greek and in Latin, is a god who's been around for a very long time. And we know that there were fairly established ways of worshiping him, and then there were ways that branched off from what would be considered the normal civic religion of ancient Greece. And in around the mid 4th century BCE, if I have my numbers correct, that's occasionally a big ask of me. I'm awful with dates. In around the mid 4th century BCE, we start seeing archaeological evidence of this Dionysus-centered cult. And I'm using the word cult here in the historic sense of a devotional practice with one or more specific divinities in mind. We see this cult of Dionysus showing up that is a little bit less mainstream and a little bit more focused on something that the mainstream civic religion didn't focus on, which is the afterlife. This is generally called Orphism, and Orphism is a branch, it's a whole tree actually of traditions that were probably as varied as there were people going around teaching others about it. But general the general characteristics of a Bacchic-Orphic tradition are a focus on Dionysus as one of the main objects of worship. There is a focus on eschatology, or the afterlife, what happens to us after we die. And there is a whole set of mythology that differs from mainstream mythology as well, or more appropriately, adds on to mainstream mythology. Those of you who are familiar with Dionysus already will know that in the mainstream myths, his mother is a mortal woman, Semele, and his father is Zeus, because it's Greek mythology, and that's what happens. But the Orphics had a tradition that Dionysus was a god who had experienced a life prior to that life as Dionysus. Before being born as the son of Zeus and Semele, he had actually been the son of Zeus and Persephone. And through a tragic series of events that involved him getting ripped apart by his own bodyguard, this pre-Dionysus, who is named Zagreus, underwent the process of dying, which is a process that not all gods go through. So he experiences death, and then he is able to be reborn from Semele. And I can go into more of the details of that story if you'd like, but I've already talked a fair amount here. But yeah, that's sort of what separates Orphism from the mainstream. And so when we bring that into today, obviously it's not an unbroken lineage, with Christianity coming through and taking over a large part of the world where Dionysus was worshipped. The lineage is not unbroken, but we have enough surviving archaeological evidence. We have enough surviving texts from the Orphics, or people talking about the Orphics. One of my favorites is Plato. He hates the Bacchic-Orphics. He thinks they're all con artists. And we have enough surviving practices or ideas of what practices might have been like to have a basis to go off of. And then the rest of it is listening to these gods and interacting with them and developing this tradition as a collaborative project as we move forward.
Excellent. Thank you for that. When I've explained it to previous people previously, it's always been kind of that, you ever seen a dog and they're trying to like cock their ear to the side to understand what you're trying to get them to do? That is the reaction I've had when I've tried to explain Bacchic-Orphism to people. So I appreciate that explanation. So what does the initiatory phase look like? Or is that an entirely like individual process?
Oh gosh. Clarification question. Did you say phase, Phase, or face, Face?
I don't know.
First.
The first, yes. Let's go with the first.
Phase, okay. The initiatory phase. So I think before I speak about what that looks like, a little bit about my credentials and why I can speak about this. Within the lineage that I'm part of, I am an initiatory specialist, which means not only have I been initiated within the tradition, not only have I been initiated within Starry Crown, but I have also guided people through the initiatory process to the point where I can now call myself, with the blessings of my powers, somebody who specializes in guiding people through. So the initiatory phase of a relationship with Dionysus. I think when most people think about Dionysus who have a cursory understanding, they think of him as being, a frat party kind of god. He's all wine, all party, all the time. And that's not untrue, but the party occasionally gets a little bit less Animal House and a little bit more The Secret History. Uh, Dionysus is not just a god of wine, he is a god of liberation in all its forms. I would say radical liberation. And it is difficult to interact with a divinity who has that as their essence and not realize that maybe something about the world you've been living in is not entirely what you've been told it is. So when you think about liberation, when you think about the experiences you have while taking part in the blessings that the god gives us, wine or psychedelics, that sort of thing, it's a very common experience to realize that there's a lot more to the world and to realize that you want to know more, you want to go deeper. In the ancient world, every initiatory tradition had two phases. We know this because this is actually documented about the Eleusinian mysteries for Demeter and Persephone. There's the phase where you acknowledge that you want to go deeper, you want to undergo an initiatory process, and you go through a process of being taught about the mysteries. And then there's the actual initiatory process itself, which can't be taught. It can only be experienced. And what I do is I do the teaching, and then I get people to the point where they can undergo the experience. But what they do and what they come away with can be highly individualized. And that's up to them and their relationship with the
So
god.
you mentioned Starry Crown. What is that? Could you explain a little as to what
Mhm.
Starry Crown is for those who don't know?
Absolutely. So Starry Crown is a Bacchic-Orphic lineage. It is a modern lineage. As I said, the Bacchic-Orphic tradition, while we have a decent amount of history to go off of, it's not unbroken. So anyone who is a Bacchic-Orphic today is practicing something new, something that is at least partially reconstructed and at least partially spirit-driven. We, as a lineage, we prize having an individual relationship with a god, but also being able to share that with other initiates in whatever way feels best, whether that's keeping in touch in person, long distance, online. It's really up to the individual and where they're located and what they feel their spirits are calling them towards. So let's see. I've talked about the fact that it's modern, the fact that it's very much up to the individual initiate. It's very spirit driven. When I teach people who are undergoing the initiatory process, I will give them a lot of historical background and a lot of grounding in primary sources and that sort of thing. But that's only part of what I'm doing. I'm also guiding journey work, I'm guiding meditation, I'm doing drumming to help people sort of get into that mindset where they can step away from themselves and commune more with Dionysus and with his retinue.
Would you be able to talk a little bit about maybe the history of Starry Crown? Sort of how old is it? Who founded it?
Yeah. Starry Crown is it started in around 2017, I think, is when we really got the ball rolling on things. And 2019 is when we sort of took it public. But obviously, it didn't come out of nowhere. A number of us who were part of the original founding group of Starry Crown had been involved with a previous Bacchic-Orphic lineage called Starry Bull. If you look up Starry Crown online, most of what's going to come up is actually related to Starry Bull, which was a project that was begun originally by Sanian. And Sanian, I know, is a very controversial figure in the pagan and polytheistic world. He did a lot of work with bringing this modern Bacchic-Orphic lineage through, and I acknowledge the impact that he had there. The vast majority of us, if not all of us in Starry Crown, are not in contact with him for a variety of reasons that I will not go into here. I would prefer not to get into the controversy itself, but the relationship between Starry Bull and Starry Crown is that they are two different traditions. Starry Crown branched off of Starry Bull. And we've been going more or less pretty strong since that branch off.
So if we're talking sort of Bacchic traditions and Orphism, we're talking mystery traditions, right? So we're talking, right. So like the Mithraic
Definitely.
mysteries, the Isaic mysteries, and so on. So what would you say differentiates what you do with Starry Crown from what other groups looking at mystery traditions or starting their own mystery traditions might be doing?
In a Bacchic-Orphic tradition, I mentioned earlier that it has a very strong focus on the afterlife, which is not unique. Most of the mystery initiatory traditions, the Mithraic, the Isaic traditions, all have a focus on the afterlife. I think one of the things that separates Bacchic-Orphism is obviously the focus on the central divinity. It's going to give a very different flavor, pun slightly intended, to what it is we do. With Dionysus as the central figure, we're looking at not just a divinity who wants what's best for us on the other side, as you might find with Isis or Aset or Mithra, but specifically what it is that Dionysus wants for his followers, which is that liberation. In Greek mythology, the underworld is not necessarily a joyful place, and the spirits of the dead are shown as shades, shadows of their former selves who don't even really remember who they are, who lose all ability to speak unless they are fed with blood. There's actually a really cool scene in the Odyssey where Odysseus has to sacrifice, I think it's a black ram, in order to feed the spirit of one of his shipmates who had passed away on the journey. So the underworld is, once you die, your fate is usually to become one of these shades who can't speak, can't remember anything, and that is not what Dionysus wants. What Dionysus wants is for everyone to be able to undergo a similar process to what he went through. Dionysus says, I died a pretty horrible death. I was ripped apart by my own guards, and I came back stronger. So there's a certain element of reincarnation that shows up with some branches of Orphism. There are certain branches who say that once you have undergone enough lives, or once you have undergone the initiatory process, when you get to the other side, if you do the right things, say the right passcodes, there's a large influence from Egyptian religion there that even Herodotus acknowledges. once you get to the other side and you've said the right passcodes, you've done the right things, you have full memory of who you are. And at that point, you are no longer just a dead person. You're no longer just one of the shades. You're one of the blessed dead. And that's a really cool place that sort of blurs the boundaries between living and dead, and human and divine. And we actually see that process with Dionysus's own wife, Ariadne, who I would say is one of the prototypical initiates. Uh, Ariadne is abandoned by Theseus on an island. Theseus had said that she was going to be his wife, but he leaves her, and instead of marrying him, she's abandoned on the shore. She's crying her eyes out. And Dionysus sees her, falls in love with her, and says, "You will be my wife. Instead, you'll be my bride." And not only does he marry her, he makes her into a goddess. He does the same for his mother, once he finds her in the underworld. So yeah, we see this constant myth theme in stories about Dionysus, of Dionysus taking somebody and making them immortal in some way, whether it's literally making them a goddess like he does with Ariadne or his mother, or making it so people will never forget their name, as he does in some other slightly more explicit stories I can think of.
Okay, so this isn't a millenarism movement. It is a okay.
Definitely.
What this sounds a lot like to me, as an initiate of the old uh, tradition previous to the Starry Crown's founding, what it always struck me as is very similar in terms of Buddhism to the way that the Buddha goes around and liberates or brings enlightenment, on a very vague, very broad kind of comparison. But the process of liberation always struck me as different than coming out of the cycle or the wheel. Like there's some really big differences, aren't there?
There definitely can be. But it's funny you should mention the wheel, because one of the one of the reasons we know so much about Bacchic-Orphism is from these funerary tablets that were buried with initiates. They're sometimes referred to collectively as the gold tablets or the Orphic gold tablets. Sometimes they're just as simple as a little gold leaf with somebody's name inscribed on it. Of course, it's gold because gold never tarnishes, it never goes bad. It's immortal just like the soul. But sometimes the gold tablets get very detailed, and at least one of them mentions what they call the grievous cycle, and how the initiate has stepped out of the grievous cycle. So there is a certain element of uh, accepting incarnated life as a grievous cycle, where I think the difference lies, and this is something that I speak to more out of experience and what I have seen in journey work that I've done and initiatory work. It's less about wanting to escape this world. Buddhism is ultimately a very not escapist in the sense of like trying to deny things. It's not, not like me with my current House of the Dragon obsession. It's trying to escape the whole cycle of incarnation. And with Bacchic-Orphism, rather than trying to escape the cycle of incarnation, I feel that there's a certain aspect of stepping away from the idea of incarnation as a grievous cycle and seeing that this world here can easily be the underworld where you don't remember who you are, you lose the ability to speak, you lose your power, or it can be the land of joyful immortality where you do everything you can with the power that you have in this life, and you don't let anyone else take that away from you. Not to say that, we're immortal in this life. Like, we have no illusions about that. We know we're going to die at some point, but understanding that this world and the underworld are not necessarily so different, and what we do in this world can impact the world that we enter into when we die.
Yeah, I
I
think that
hope that
made
made
sense.
sense.
So, and talking about operating in this world, often when people write about the Eleusinian mysteries or the Orphic mysteries or so on, they are talking about mystery traditions as being these esoteric sort of extracurricular things. Sort of historically, at times when even they were decidedly popular, and you'd sort of got Roman generals or emperors or so on involved with them, it's still an additional thing to temple cult or domestic practices and things. So I was wondering how you navigate that, and if you could talk about maybe what your sort of exoteric as opposed to esoteric practices like, sort of what your equivalent to that sort of household or temple practices that you're building this around.
That's a really good question. And my answer is I don't know that I have an exoteric practice because of my political approach and how it intertwines with my religious approach. Um, this is not true of all members of Starry Crown, but it is true of a large number of us. I will speak for myself. I am an anarchist. I am not overly fond of the idea of a state, let alone a state religion. Uh, One of the things that we see with historical Orphism is that there were people who seemed to be less interested in the civic religion, in the state religion, and would instead turn to these as their alternative. Uh, and we also see a strong Dionysian streak within a lot of rebellions in the ancient world. We see prior to 184 BCE in southern Italy these Bacchic worshippers who were potentially using Dionysian worship meetings as a place to create their own sort of a dual power structure where they were forming their own allegiances, forming their own networks that offered them the protection and the resources that a state might otherwise have done. The Romans did not like that. And so in 184 BCE, they banned the worship of Dionysus unless your specific worship group got the seal of approval of the Roman government. We also see, uh, of course, with Spartacus, the leader of the famous slave rebellion, his wife was actually a priestess of Dionysus. And one of their biggest victories was won on the slopes of Vesuvius, which was a mountain sacred to Dionysus. It's said that they were pretty much penned in on all sides by the Roman army, except for one side, which was just sheer cliffs. And they were able to escape the Roman army by taking grapevines, weaving them together into ropes, and going down those cliffs and just slipping away from them in the dead of night. So I think I'm going slightly beyond the scope of your question. I apologize, but my answer is you can have an entirely esoteric mystery religion and not have to bother with a civic religion unless you feel called to. I'm not going to.
I think we're having tech issues.
Yep.
There we go. Okay, you're back. You cut out at you cut out
Oh
at
no,
I'm
was
not
that on
gonna.
my end? I'm so sorry. Okay, okay. All right, just checking to see if I'm still connected. Okay. Thanks. I belatedly got the helpful, your internet connection
Like,
is
oh, thanks. No
unstable
shit.
notice from
Hmm.
Zoom. All right. Oh gosh, I'm sorry, I have to backtrack. Uh, what I was saying was my answer is that you don't necessarily have to have an exoteric tradition that you turn to. Uh, especially one that is state approved or state run. That's not necessarily what you have to do. You can have an entirely esoteric practice. You can have an entirely mystery-based practice. Um, I don't fault anyone who has an exoteric practice that they ground themselves in. I have actually a very mundane cycle of prayers that I do every day. I'm not going out there and doing journey work every single day. But I'm not going and praying to Athena, the savior of the city state,
Would
necessarily.
you not consider that sort of mundane cycle of prayers that you do regularly as part of a sort of domestic exoteric practice that you're rooted in then?
I think I misunderstood your question then. Yeah,
Mhm.
I do just have a daily cycle of prayers. It's uh, largely influenced
Mhm.
by astrological practice, actually. I'll say different prayers to divinities on different days. I say prayers to the face of Apollo that I work with on Sundays, prayers to Ariadne and Aphrodite on Fridays, that
So
sort of
is that
thing.
ruler of the weekdays? Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, ruler
So
of the
then it's sort of
weekdays.
Selene on Monday and so on. Okay, cool. No, that's interesting
Exactly.
just because I'd been looking at the decans recently, and if you look at different things, you see the list of 36 Greek or Hellenistic gods associated with each decan, and sort of yeah, all the different
Yes.
interesting ways of choosing who to worship and when and so on. So
Yes, I've been an astrology nerd for some time, and it's been a really wonderful way to ground my practice. It's like, oh, uh, not only does this help me remember what day of the week it is, that's something that I'm constantly in danger of forgetting, but it also allows me to sort of separate out who I say prayers to when. Otherwise, I run the risk of feeling pressured to say prayers to all of my divinities every day, and that's just not sustainable. I have a lot of devotional relationships with a number
mm,
of
that
divine
makes sense.
powers.
Yeah. So then you're sort of making it manageable and making it work for you. So in a couple of the sort of things that was sort of thrown around when we were talking about having you on were mention of the toys of Dionysus. So, for those who don't know, what are the toys of Dionysus and how do they connect to all of this?
The Toys of Dionysus are a series of literal toys that are mentioned throughout ancient texts in the context of initiatory practices. Uh, it goes back to the story that I was mentioning earlier, when Dionysus, before Dionysus was Dionysus, when he was Zagreus instead. Zagreus, as I mentioned, was a son of Zeus and Persephone, and the Orphic story goes that he was actually the next in line to inherit rulership of the cosmos from Zeus. But Zeus's wife, Hera, did not like that idea because she was not the mother of she was not the mother of Zagreus. This was not a full-on true birth, uh, to use a more old-fashioned term. So Hera convinces Dionysus's bodyguard, who are called the Titans, to do away with Zagreus. And in order to do that, they distract Zagreus with a series of toys. The Titans take this series of toys to distract Zagreus. And depending on which text you read, it can be a different series of toys. when you combine all the texts together, you get a list of 10. And those 10 toys are the ball, the knucklebone dice, the hoop or wheel, the bull roarer, the spinning top, the ball jointed doll or the jointed doll. I don't think they had ball joints at that point. The tuft of wool, the apple, the rattle, and the mirror. And each one of these distracts Zagreus a little bit more so that if he's running away and gets distracted by one of these toys, the Titans can get closer to him, closer to pouncing. And none of the first 9 seem to really do the trick. Zagreus is still outpacing the Titans until he finds the mirror, looks into it, and is just completely mesmerized by what he sees. Keep in mind, back in the day, mirrors were, one, not terribly common, and two, not made of the silver-backed glass that they are today. That gives a pretty good reproduction of what we look like when we look into them. They were polished metal, often bronze. So what you see when you look into one of these old mirrors is going to be a slightly distorted reflection of your face. And so as he's kind of looking into this mirror and trying to make sense of what he's seeing, the Titans pounce and rip him apart. And that's when he starts undergoing his process of death and rebirth. And every death and rebirth is an initiatory process. And every initiatory process is a death and rebirth. You're not the same person on the other side that you were before you went in. So in Starry Crown, we believe that these toys themselves are initiatory spirits. And because they were part of Dionysus' initiation from being Zagreus to becoming Dionysus, Dionysus was able to essentially go back to those 10 spirits and say, hey, look at what you helped me do. Look at who I am now. Can you help me do that with like other people? And the toys agreed, and they've been part of Team Dionysus ever since. So each one of them has a different set of lessons to give, and helping people walk through those lessons is what I do.
So would each of them having separate lessons be why, if someone came completely sort of brand new as a complete beginner who didn't know anything, you couldn't just go, well, here's the mirror and we'll take you from the start to the end?
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's a process, and there has to be a process. This is the more gentle Dionysian initiation. He's not always so gentle with people with other initiatory processes in the myths. Sometimes instead of this wonderful meet your 10 new friends and then undergo the initiation, sometimes it's, yeah, no, let's just give you the whole ripping apart thing. You definitely won't be the same person on the other side of that.
Are there people who work with the toys but don't initiate?
Yes, I actually know a couple people who have gone through the process and have either chosen not to initiate. We always let that be the prospective initiate's choice. Or they get to the end of the process, and we always do divination at the end of the teaching part of the initiatory process. Sometimes that divination comes back with, there's something else that this person needs to do, or they came this far and that's fine. They don't need to do anything else. Like they got what they needed to out of this process. They don't need to do anything further.
So there's room for initiates and non-initiates in the midst of all this, and there's the ability to go between one state to the other.
Yes.
as you're called.
Yes, absolutely. And for anyone who, sorry, for anyone who does undergo the initiatory process and decides not to, or the gods say now is not the right time, that door is always open later.
So, oh, go
So,
on.
oh, go ahead, Snow. Nope,
Okay.
go ahead.
So, if someone, I'm just sort of picturing a sort of a complete novice coming to this, sort of hearing about these sort of the 10 toys, the different levels here, and they're sort of hearing, all of this. Um, the sort of analogy that I'm wondering that they might be sort of thinking of is, well, in the Lord of the Rings, why didn't the Eagles just take Frodo straight to Mount Doom from the Shire and then job done? We don't need 3 films and way too many chapters of people running through fields. So, how would you kind of tackle that in this situation with the levels of initiation and all the different lessons here if you had a complete beginner being like, well, come on, we want the fast track here?
Uh, I would I would tell people the story of the fast-tracked initiations that we know of in myth. There is one that is uh in terms in fan fiction terms, it would be starting off angsty and then having a happy ending. Uh, and then there's one where it's not a happy ending. There's definitely an initiation. It's definitely fast tracked. It's a little less on the consensual side. So the one that is consensual and has a happy ending is that of Ariadne. There are actually multiple stories of how her initiation happens. All of them have in common the starting point. She is abandoned by her previous lover Theseus on a deserted island. In some versions of the story, she is just rescued from the island by Dionysus, and she becomes his bride, and they go off and live happily ever after. In some versions of the story, she's only saved by him once she commits suicide. In some versions of the story, she actually does stay with Theseus for a short time after. They go to a different island and she dies in childbirth. That happens supposedly on the island of Cyprus, where she's honored as an incarnation of Aphrodite. So that's a fast-tracked one, but there is a hidden darkness underneath it. This idea that there is an element of death that happens. Certainly, death of the life that she had lived previously. She had previously been a princess of Crete, uh, but also potentially the loss of one's own life in the myth. And sometimes that's a literal loss of life, and sometimes it's a metaphor. Again, every initiation is a death and rebirth. The more tragic, less consensual story of a fast-tracked initiation is that of Pentheus, who is a mythical king of Thebes, Greek Thebes, not Egyptian. And Pentheus is actually a cousin of Dionysus in the myths. His mother is a sister of Semele, Dionysus's mortal mother. Pentheus becomes king of Thebes at a relatively young age, and he is what you might call the law and order candidate. He is very much against anything that is going to throw the city of Thebes into chaos. And one of the things that is guaranteed to throw the city of Thebes into chaos is the advent of Dionysus. When Dionysus comes to a city, one of the first things that happens is that the feminine people of the city drop everything they're doing and run off screaming into the mountains, which means children are not being taken care of. Weaving is not getting done. Food is not getting cooked. Complete disorder. And Pentheus cannot have this or he will look weak. So he bans the worship of Dionysus. Now, Dionysus is one of those gods where you mess with him, that's fine. You mess with his followers, and now you've started some shit. So when Pentheus forbids the worship of Dionysus, Dionysus comes to Thebes, and there is a whole play about this. This is the plot of Euripides' Bacchae. It is one of my favorite plays from the ancient world. Dionysus comes to Thebes, disguises himself as just another one of those wandering, weird priests of Dionysus, and gives Pentheus every chance he can. Are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure that banning the worship of a god is your best idea? Pentheus is so incensed at being questioned that he throws this Dionysus in disguise into the dungeons. Dionysus causes an earthquake, his chains fall off his wrists, he walks out, goes back to Pentheus. So, really, are you sure this is your best idea? And Pentheus says, I have no other choice. Stop questioning me about this. This is what I am going to do. So Dionysus says, okay, buddy, you want to see exactly what you want to see exactly what the followers of Dionysus get up to? I will show you. But you have to disguise yourself as one of them. So there's this whole scene in the Bacchae where essentially Dionysus is putting Pentheus into drag. And then the two of them go out to where these mysterious nocturnal rituals are happening. Dionysus says, okay, now you go climb that tree. And from that tree, you'll be able to look down and see what the followers of Dionysus are doing in their weird mystic rites. So Pentheus climbs the tree. And when he's up there, Dionysus calls out to the followers and says, hey guys, check out this cool lion up in the tree. And casts a spell on his followers so that all they see is a lion. One of the things that Dionysus followers get up to in the myths is they will chase down wild animals and rip those animals apart with their bare hands, reenacting what was done to Zagreus. So the Maenads chase Pentheus, rip him apart with their bare hands, and that is a fast-tracked initiation.
It reminds me very much of a story in the sagas where a king is sure, I can't remember the name of the saga or the ruler at the moment, but they do a mock sacrifice to Odin, and the reed they poke him with actually turns into a spear, and the little bit of cordage that they had lying around that was around his neck suddenly becomes a big thick rope. And so, yeah, definite shades of, well, this is going to happen one way or the other, asshole.
Yeah, so you can have the, hey, you want to see the process that I went through? You want me to guide you through this? You want to meet my 10 friends who can all help you out? Cool, I've got you. Like, that's definitely one way to do it. Or you can have the fuck around, find out method.
Yup. I'm laughing because there's so many stark contrasts that I appreciate that are similar enough between Dionysus and Othin. I'm sorry, please go ahead, Snow.
No, I was just going to say, so um, we sort of touched on how you sort of um, got your sort of socio-political views in there with sort of the queerness aspect and the anarchism in there with sort of questioning the status quo and questioning leadership, questioning tradition, this kind of egalitarian approach here. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit maybe about how you sort of connect your work in academia with this.
Oh, my work in academia is largely largely practical. I have a background in classical studies. I majored in classical studies with a concentration in Latin. If my university had offered Latin and ancient Greek as a double major, I probably would have done that, but I think they put a hard cap on how nerdy any one of their alumni can be. So I studied both Latin and Greek. I usually use that to help with translation projects. I recently helped a friend of mine translate a portion of a poem by the Roman poet Ovid. This particular passage talked about the goddess Flora, who's a goddess of flowers, springtime, sex work, everything that makes the world better. Um, and so I got to put that to use as a devotional project. Uh, Flora is a goddess that more recently, like in the past several years, started developing a relationship with. So I got to help my friend who's not a classical studies major put together a book about Flora by providing my own translation of this primary source. I've done similar projects. I worked with a group of Starry Crown initiates previously to offer a course on the entire corpus of the Orphic hymns. And over the course of that class, I translated all of the Orphic hymns. So that and like being able to, oh, this is actually something that I enjoy doing is understanding how academia, especially classical studies academia, which has a large Victorian influence, has strongly, strongly whitewashed the ancient world. And being able to look past that whitewashing and offer perhaps a more accurate view of what things were like, both in terms of diversity of people. People traveled a lot more in the ancient world than we give them credit for. So the Greek-speaking world would have been full of all different kinds of people, but also being able to speak to the diversity of religious practice and how that would have influenced Bacchic-Orphism, and then how Bacchic-Orphism would have turned around and influenced everything else. We see elements, I touched on this earlier, elements of Egyptian religion in the Bacchic mystery traditions. Herodotus actually says that the mysteries that are called Bacchic and Orphic are actually the mysteries, they are mysteries that are Pythagorean and Egyptian. So we know that there was a strong connection between those two parts of the world. We see some influence, perhaps, of Buddhism and Hinduism coming through. We know that there was, in ancient Central Asia, there was a strong overlap in some places between Buddhism and the Hellenistic religions that have been brought through by Alexander and his troops. So a lot of crossover between South Asian deities and religion and Mediterranean deities and religion.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the Heracles that they have found alongside several, I believe, Hindu gods in damn it, now I've lost the particular temple or cropping of rock that these are all carved into. Shit.
I know the piece that you're talking about, though, and that was actually specifically what I was picturing in my mind when I was talking about that. So yeah, that's one of the things that I do with my academic background is like, okay, you are a busy person. You didn't major in classical studies. Let me help you sort through what's bullshit and what's not.
So a different kind of initiation. Gotcha.
After a fashion,
Out of
yeah.
I mean, go ahead. Nope, go ahead, Snow.
Out of curiosity, then, just sort of maybe it's tangential and sort of outside of where you're working, or maybe it isn't. Just out of curiosity, have you been sort of keeping an eye on how things have been going with the analysis of all the sort of magical papyri and such?
I've been hearing bits and pieces, but that's not something that
Just
I'd
because
love to hear
in
more.
sort of the last sort of few years and then decade or so, I mean the what we're like 20, 30 years now since Nag Hammadi was unearthed or somewhere around there, I think.
Hmm.
Um, and so sort of because there's these manuscripts are coming out and people are translating them and retranslating them and contextualizing and taking fragments and putting bits together and sort of actually going and looking and saying, well, Alexandrian Egypt, Ptolemaic Egypt, Roman Egypt, and sort of the Hellenosphere and how big and sort of influential the Hellenistic world was. You can actually see things from Second Temple era Judaism and the early Christianities and the early different Gnostic traditions or schools and ancient Egyptian religion, ancient Greek religion, ancient Roman religion, all kind of coexisting and influencing each other and such in these texts, and also in how these texts are being found next to each other. Yeah.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So I was just curious if you'd sort of looked into any of that at all much. Mm-hmm.
I have taken a cursory look into it. The closest that I get to the magical practices of that span of time is probably the work that I do with astrology. But I mean, I have a translation. I have Betts's translation of the magical papyri on the bookshelf behind me. I've not studied it extensively, but I can definitely speak to what you were saying. It is such an incredibly rich mixed bag of traditions where in one spell you'll be calling out to Iao Sabaoth, and in another you'll be calling out to Zeus, and in another you'll be calling out to Set Tifon. And yeah, it's just it's delicious.
Yeah, and I think it's Faraone. I might be misremembering his name or mispronouncing it. Is currently working on sort of the new translation
Hmm.
since Betts. And then there's also that group who are working on translating the Coptic magical papyri as well. Yeah,
Oh, that's very exciting news.
yeah,
I will
because
definitely have to go take a look. I'm excited that Pharaone is working on a new translation of that. I think I have a
yeah, I
couple of his
think the
works on the same
first
bookshelf.
volume of it is out and available, but it's ongoing. And then sort of
Yeah.
the Coptic papyri is an interesting one because you hear Coptic and think, oh, it's Christianity, but actually Coptic is the last remaining Egyptian language, and so you've still got traces of that in there. And yeah,
Hmm.
um, so out sort of branching off what you were just saying there, then sort of how big a part of your practice does astrology take up?
Astrology is astrology is one of those things where I don't think I'm ever going to be good at it, and that's not because it's not because I don't try, it's because it's so fractal in nature. You can spend decades looking into the movements or the the alignments of one fixed star, or you can go full on. I'm going to predict the next 30 years of geopolitics, or I'm going to be really good at helping people choose when to time things, or I'm going to be really good at reading people's birth charts. There's just so much out there, and I am both a perfectionist and have occasionally difficulty choosing what I focus on, thanks ADHD. So I tend to approach astrology for the sake of my own sanity, in a way similar to how I approach my other religious practice. I tend to think of the stars and the planets as divine beings in their own right that I can form relationships with, and I just try to feel into those relationships.
Now, I know that Dionysus, obviously, and the toys are big parts of the Starry Crown tradition. Are there other Greek gods that play large roles or other spirits that play large roles within that specific tradition?
When we talk about Dionysus within the Starry Crown, we acknowledge that he doesn't act alone. Dionysus is not a solo kind of entity. He always has a retinue with him. That retinue is going to be full. When I talk about the retinue of any divinity, I think about the spirits that are associated with them. Like Dionysus will always have his satyrs. Aphrodite will always have the erotes, the eros and all of the other versions of love personified. Um, but also within the retinue, uh, I and other members of the Starry Crown imagine that there are, the ancestral lineages. Within the retinue are all the people who have ever worshipped Dionysus, from when he was first worshipped to, whoever the most recent devotee who died was. We have all of the people associated with Dionysus in myths, whether they're other divinities or uh, people who may have been mortal at one time, like Ariadne, like Semele. Uh, and we have, oh gosh, within there's so much that I can get into. There's all of the all of the plants allies that are associated with Dionysus. There's the vine itself. There's ivy. Out here on the West Coast where I am right now, there's wild cucumber, which is an incredibly Bacchic plant. It's sometimes called the old man in the ground because the plant grows out of this enormous root that it can be the size of a human body and is sometimes confused for an actual buried human body when people are like using ground radar. Um, Plant allies, entheogen allies. A retinue is not just human-shaped people. I'm sorry, what was your question again? I
No,
totally went on a
that was a
tangent.
helpful tangent. My question was about if there were other Greek gods and also what other spirits play a part in the Starry Crown tradition.
Thank you. In Starry Crown, we honor Dionysus and Ariadne both. That's actually where Starry Crown gets its name from. It's a reference to the constellation Corona Borealis, the Northern Crown, which is said to be the wedding crown that Ariadne wore when she married Dionysus. Dionysus took it, tossed it into the heavens, and it's now pretty much directly overhead at night if you live in the Northern Hemisphere. Um, and going back to, I think there had been a question about Snow, you had asked about astrology as well. That's the other reason why astrology is important to me, is because of that myth theme of Dionysus taking a person or an object and tossing it up into the stars to be memorialized. That's another form of apotheosis or immortality.
So I'm curious then, because you sort of mentioned local plants and things, how, if at all, you're making the sort of Dionysus reverence and the Starry Crown tradition meaningful for where you are, and sort of how you're localizing or regionalizing this understanding of Dionysus and the Bacchic-Orphic tradition, if at all.
That can be a complicated question when we're in a place that has such a history of colonization, because any practice that is brought to this land from the outside because of this history is in some way benefiting from that colonization. But Dionysus has always been a wandering god. He's always coming to new places. He's always the stranger arriving somewhere, bringing gifts of wine and plants and plant allies and liberation. So I tend to look at where I am, look at what the gods show me around me, and see if there are things in the places that I live that reflect those gods back to me. Um, we're in the middle of wildfire season here in California, and uh, a lot of these wildfires are started by lightning, and I tend to see Zeus's hand in that. Dionysus was born out of a lightning strike. His mother was tricked into telling Zeus, the thing that I want most from you is to see you in your true form. And Zeus's true form is the lightning. And it is very hard to be immortal and withstand a direct lightning strike. I also see Semele in the wildfires, and that actually came out of a message that came through in ritual earlier in the year. She asked to be honored when the lightning strikes the earth and the wildfires start. So some of it is listening to the messages that our gods and spirits send us, either on an individual level or this was a message that came through in a collective ritual. And sometimes it's just sitting and meditating with the spirits. I think one of my favorite experiences there was I travel between the two coasts, and the other place that I call home is in the Chesapeake Bay. And the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay was shaped in part by a meteor that struck a long, long, long time ago. And in Greek mythology, there's this story of Aphrodite being born from the ocean when the original sky king, Uranus, is castrated. His severed junk falls into the ocean. The sea foams around it, and Aphrodite is born from the sea foam. It's one of the more bizarre stories, but I love it. And so when I was thinking about the geological history of that region when I was living there, and there was the story of the meteor strike, it really was kind of like a bolt from the blue hitting me of Aphrodite sort of speaking to me in that moment and saying, yeah, that was me. And so I was like, oh, so you're in charge of the bay? And hearing a response of yes. Hearing for varied values of the word, I tend to get just sense perceptions of, is this correct? Is this not correct?
I actually appreciate you clarifying that because it's one of those things with esoteric language that is so easy to slip into or to not know is for ease of communication.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I heard when what you really experienced was this feeling of pressure or this proprioception, or maybe you heard a word or you got a scene or something. Yeah, like I appreciate you breaking that down.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the way that I experience that sort of communication from my gods and spirits is sometimes I can hear it in my head as a conversation or sense it physically as a conversation happening. But, for a conversation that might take you and me 5 or 10 minutes to have, it can happen in like 5 or 10 seconds.
Then your brain is doing the whole I gotta unwrap this noodle and figure out what the hell I just experienced.
Yes, it's like, oh, okay, thanks for dropping that on me right now. I guess I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes lying here and like recovering from that.
So, if someone wanted to reach out and ask you more questions about the Starry Crown group, or maybe if someone was curious about joining, how would someone go about that? Is that doable?
It's totally doable. We don't have anyone offering a toys class right now. We generally wait to get a decent number of people showing interest and then see who has the capacity to teach a course. But we're getting to the point where someone will probably need to offer the course soon because we're getting some interest. But people can reach out to me directly. I can give my email here verbally, or you can post it with my bio, either way. And then I can uh, do what I can to connect people and see who's interested in either offering a toys class or just having a chat about it. Like you don't need to anticipate taking the entirety of the toys class when you reach
So
out to me.
to
We can just
sort
talk.
of reiterate an earlier point, if people start trying to search online for Starry Crown and run into Starry Bull, that is something very different. That is nothing to do with you, and your email address will be in the show notes for the episode for people to reach you.
That
Cool.
is correct. Thank you for reiterating that. Yeah, Starry Crown does not have a very strong online presence, and that has been a purposeful choice.
Makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you being willing so much to dig into the. It feels so much because I've been initiated into the Toys of Dionysus. There's so much there to sink your teeth into that we could easily spend, the whole time talking about one toy, let alone the the tradition, let alone initiation. And I really just appreciate how you've gone both in depth and breadth on what it's like being part of this, what it's like initiating and the process and everything. It really is a liberation of mind and soul, right?
Yes.
And
And that's, oh gosh, I could spend hours just on that alone.
I I'm just sitting here and reflecting on it because we've taken a rather labyrinthine route, but I don't know that we've actually asked about the labyrinth itself yet. And I wanted to make sure that we hit on that before we went our separate ways because it provides such a hmm, sometimes backdrop, sometimes root, sometimes it is the initiatory ground. Yeah.
D, all of the above. The D stands for Dionysus.
So at least for me, like that labyrinth is a lot on its own. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Definitely. I will try my best. I know I have run very
I
long-winded
appreciate it. So,
in this, but uh, so as with a lot of what I've been talking about, it goes back to a story, and this goes back to Ariadne. The story that Ariadne comes from is one that is often part of Greek mythology 101. Um, Once upon a time on the island of Crete, there was a king named Minos. He had a daughter named Ariadne, and he had sort of a son, and that's complicated because this second child of the royal family is named Asterion, a name that means starry, the starry one. And he was not fully human. He was the Minotaur, the bull of Minos, is literally what Minotaur means in Greek. And his mother was Minos's wife, Pasiphae, and his father was a literal bull. There was a whole cow costume involved. That's literally a part of the myth. But without going too in depth into the mechanics, Asterion was born with a human body and a bull head. And Minos took one look at that and said, "Wife, I don't think that's mine. But I don't think I can kill it either because this is monstrous on a divine level. And I'm worried that if I kill it, I am going to bring some divine wrath on this family. So, but I can't just let that roam the streets either, because I'm pretty sure it's carnivorous. So the same person who made the cow costume got tasked with making the Labyrinth, which was this, uh, in popular imagination, it's, the maze-like garden surrounding David Bowie's Goblin City. It is a maze. It is an impossible to solve maze. But when you see the labyrinth drawn out as a symbol, it is one path that just loops back in on itself. Um, both of those images are equally true, mythologically speaking and intuitively speaking. So Asterion, this poor little Minotaur kid, was imprisoned in the labyrinth because this is what you do with monsters, I guess. At least when you're a king and you have a kingdom to run. And y'all probably can guess my feelings on that. But as part of Asterion's upkeep, the cities that were conquered by Crete were forced to give up children every 7 years. So the city-state of Athens, during one of the years that it had to offer up 7 youths and 7 maidens, so the story goes, one of those youths was a volunteer. It was the king's son, and this prince of Athens was named Theseus. Theseus goes with the other sacrifices to Crete, and while he's there, before the sacrifices are tossed into the labyrinth, Theseus meets Ariadne, the princess and Asterion's half-sister. Ariadne falls in love with him and offers to help him solve the labyrinth. She sneaks him a sword and a ball of yarn. And with the ball of yarn, he's able to make his way through the labyrinth without getting lost. If he reaches a dead end, he can just follow the yarn back. And with Ariadne's help, he makes it to the heart of the labyrinth and kills Asterion. And then, with that deed done, he takes the captives who had not been eaten yet, takes Ariadne, flees from Crete, and that is where he then turns on Ariadne and abandons her on the island of Naxos. So the story goes. But that labyrinth is something that I associate both with Dionysus and with Ariadne, but especially Ariadne. If we look at the labyrinth as a metaphor for an initiatory process, and it can be a metaphor for the initiatory process among many other things, it can also be a journey location if you do journey work. It can be the experience of, if you're anything like me, trying to navigate any airport parking situation can be a labyrinth. So yeah, there's definitely a psychogeography aspect to it. But the person with the power to solve the labyrinth is none other than Dionysus' beloved. And if she is the prototypical initiate, then she's also the one who can help anyone going through their own labyrinth process. So that is at least a surface level of what the labyrinth means to me.
Thank you. So, do we have any other questions or anything else that we want to go over before we call this episode, folks?
I feel like we have a show.
All right, beautiful people. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Emily. This has been a fabulous discussion, and I hope to have you back on for another one because God knows we could definitely have more.
I would be honored and very pleased. I've had a great time talking with you guys.
Thank you all.
or talking at you,
No,
as the
thank
case
you.
may be.
No, definitely. Yeah, seriously.
It's
Please go
been
ahead, Snow.
it's been fascinating to hear you. So thank you for coming on.
And I am so excited to hear about what each of you has going on. Uh, Books and Epagamental days. Did I say that right? I should
It's
know
how
this.
I
It's a
say
Greek
it.
word.
I have no idea what the correct pronunciation is.
I'd have to go back and look at the Greek.
Well, I appreciate you joining us and really appreciate all of our listeners. Oh, before we head off, do you have any pluggables to plug, Emily?
Oh gosh, pluggables. Most of my pluggables are not for me. I'm very much a support character in a lot of my friends' stories. I will say that a friend of mine has recently come out with a book on Dionysus, anarchy, and millenarism. It's through Contagion Press, and it's called Warlike Howling Pure. That is by a Rayon who is also an initiate of Starry Crown.
Excellent. We'll have to put that in the show notes. Um, Snow, plug your pluggables.
You can find me and everything I do at snowthegoth.com or linktree/snowthegoth. You'll find everything there, including new and surprising things and old and familiar things and in between things. Yeah. Emily Streaking Fate, what are you doing?
You can find my occasionally updated blog at streakingfate.wordpress.com. Saranth.
You can find my work at saranth.wordpress.com. You can find my Patreon and patreon.com/Saranth Odinson. You can also find me at Three Pagans on Tap. Three Pagans on Tap on YouTube. There we go. Where we sit around, we drink, we talk about animism, polytheism, and everything in between. We're actually going to be recording this coming Tuesday, so stay tuned for that and join us, please. We're also going to be having our wonderful recorder, editor, and all-around awesome mod, Jason, on, and we're going to be having good conversations for that. So please join us. We're going to be live at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For this show, you do not need to be a Patreon member to be part of the Discord, but we do appreciate any and all Patreon and all of our folks who leave us 5-star reviews and all the various podcasting apps. We know that we have had some issues lately, and that is partly because we are trying out new venues for the podcast. We're trying out Podbean, and we're also still putting our podcast out from Patreon into Spotify. So Spotify is probably going to be the main way to get your feed at the moment. I know that I'm having issues with Podcast Addict. We are trying to address this as we can. But sometimes the migration period for Podbean to actually get things is about 45 days. So this is going to be a little bit of a process.
Yeah, some of the podcasting stuff we can fix within seconds of people messaging us or emailing us or whatever. Other stuff, it could take a while. So we're trying to keep you guys up to date with what's happening as it's happening and can only apologize and thank you for your patience.
So to all of our listeners, to all of the people who are part of our Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/aroundgrandfatherfire, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for being with us. And thank you for joining us. And we will see you next time around the fire.